The night fell over the convent of St. Clair with unusual fury. Lightning sliced the sky like divine whips, and the thunder cracked so loudly it shook the foundation stones of the old sanctuary. The sisters had long gone to sleep, or tried to, but Samara remained seated at the edge of her narrow bed, fingers trembling over her rosary, trying to quiet the unrest clawing at her chest for days. Then it happened. The front door burst open.
Welcome to today's story. Make sure to subscribe and like the video so you don't miss what's coming next.
A crash, violent, urgent echoing through the stone corridors, like a curse that refused to whisper. Samara leapt to her feet, heart pounding like war drums. Footsteps followed, fast, wet, heavy. Footprints trailed across the polished floors, mixing rain and blood. She didn't have time to think. He appeared. Tall, broad, drenched head to toe. His breath came fast, ragged, like an animal cornered. One hand clutched his abdomen, blood leaking through his fingers in dark, thick streams. His white linen shirt was torn and soaked, clinging to every muscle. His eyes locked with hers wild, piercing, and he spoke in a low, commanding tone that brooked no refusal. "Help me, now!" She took a step back, lips parted in shock. Her habit clung to her body, damp with fear and something else. And yet, she nodded. Something deep within her recognized this man not from sight, but from instinct. "Follow me," she said, her voice a barely there whisper. She led him through the darkened hallway into the old infirmary, a room no one used anymore. Samara kept it for moments of silence, solitude, and maybe memories. She locked the door behind them. The smell of blood already filled the air. He collapsed beside the bed, bracing himself with both hands. "Lie down. You need to take off your shirt," she said, her voice tight. "You'll have to cut it," he rasped, giving her a crooked grin even through the pain. No time to be gentle. Her cheeks flushed. She hesitated, then grabbed the scissors with hands that still remembered what they once were trained to do. Before she was a nun, she was a nurse. With careful precision, she began cutting through the soaked fabric. But when the shirt fell open, her breath hitched. His torso was hard sculpted muscle beneath tanned skin, tight with tension. But what truly struck her were the tattoos. Latin inscriptions, symbols, numbers. A language she didn't speak, but understood with her nerves. A world far from God's and dangerously close to hers. The wound was deep, just above his hip. She knelt beside him, disinfected the area, and pressed the gauze to the open flesh. "This is going to burn," she warned softly. "I'm already in hell, sister. What's a little more fire?" He smirked, teeth gritted. She turned her eyes away. The heat of his body, his scent leather, blood. Man was too close, too real. "What's your name?" she asked, almost as a defense. "Marco Aurelio," he said, voice rough. "But you can call me Marco or Bastard, whichever suits you." She tried not to react, focused on cleaning the wound, suturing it stitch by stitch as he lay still silent, but watching her. Always watching. "And you, sister, do you have a real name?" Her hands froze for half a second. The question hit too deep. She looked up. "Samara." He repeated it quietly, tasting it. "Beautiful name. For a woman who heals hell with angel hands." She finished the stitching, placed a cloth over his abdomen, and abruptly stood up. Her breath was unsteady. She had come too close, let too much in. Marco's eyes slowly closed, exhaustion claiming him. But just before sleep took him, he muttered, "If God sent you to save me." He's got a twisted sense of humor. Samara didn't move. She simply stood there, listening to the storm rage outside and to the storm inside her, louder still. He had broken through the convent's door. But what he truly shattered was her world. And from now on, nothing would ever be sacred again. The convent was wrapped in the thick silence of the early hours. the kind that made even the stones feel sacred. Outside, the storm had faded, but inside the old stone walls, something still stirred, not in the sky, but in the air between two souls who never should have met. Marco slept. Stretched out on the infirmary cot, his body had finally surrendered to exhaustion. The stitched wound on his abdomen throbbed dully, no longer bleeding, thanks to the firm and steady hands of Sister Samara. And though his body rested, his instincts remained alert. He opened his eyes slowly, breath shallow, trained by a life where trust was fatal. The world around him was still dark, the sun not yet risen, the faintest glow of morning just starting to bleed into the room through the window slats. Then he saw her. Samara! She was curled in a wooden chair beside the cot, arms folded tightly around her body, head tilted in sleep. Her black habit draped around her like armor. Though there was nothing rigid about the way she slept, she looked almost delicate. A strand of chestnut hair peeked from beneath her veil. Her lips were parted ever so slightly, her breathing soft, rhythmic, her expression at peace, untouched by the shadows of the world he came from. Marco watched her in silence, a strange feeling stirring in his chest, unfamiliar and unwanted. He had seen beauty before, yes, but this was different. This was untouched, pure, off-limits. And still, he couldn't look away. His voice, rough from sleep and silence, came out as a whisper. An angel or madness? Her eyes fluttered open as if summoned by the sound. She blinked, slowly adjusting to the dimness. The moment she registered him awake, she straightened her posture and instinctively fixed her veil, as if trying to recompose herself, her shield going back up. "How do you feel?" she asked softly, her voice still thick with sleep. Marco sat up slowly, his hand grazing the fresh bandage over his abdomen. "Better than I should, thanks to you." A pause. Then, more serious, "I need to make a call." She nodded, said nothing more, and stepped out of the room. Discreet, respectful, mysterious. Minutes later, Marco was on a phone call, speaking low and fast. As he redressed, his fingers moved slower than usual. The pain was still there, but dulled, manageable. Outside, the world was beginning to breathe again. The sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. A black car pulled up discreetly behind the convent. From it stepped a tall man in a dark suit and sharp eyes. Dante, Marco's most trusted man. He said nothing, just waited, alert, like a shadow given form. Marco walked down the hall toward the entrance. Every step was steady but labored. He wasn't at full strength, not yet. As he reached the door, Samara was already there, waiting. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, like a statue carved by quiet patience, but her eyes held something else. They looked at each other. 1,000 words unsaid, 1,000 things forbidden. She broke the silence first. "Take care of yourself, and see a proper doctor. That wound was deep." He gave her a crooked smile, more in his eyes than his lips. "You did better than any doctor could have." He paused, let his gaze linger on hers. "I hope I'll see you again, Samara." Her breath caught slightly at the sound of her name spoken, like that, not reverent, but intimate. She didn't smile. She just nodded. He turned and got into the car. The engine hummed to life. The tires rolled forward. And just like that, Marco disappeared down the dirt road, swallowed by the gray mist of the coming dawn. Samara remained at the door, motionless, watching the emptiness where the car had been. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere, a bird sang the first fragile note of morning. And inside her, something had shifted. A part of her soul, perhaps. A line crossed. A flame, small but real, impossible now to pretend it had never been lit. The convent had returned to silence. The ancient stone walls, which had so often echoed whispered prayers, now seemed heavier, as if they, too, carried a secret. Samara walked slowly through the dim hallways, the edge of her habit brushing her ankles, her rosary swaying softly with each step. Her body ached not from the long night, but from something harder to name. Emptiness. He was gone. And with him, he had taken something she didn't know still lived inside her. She paused in front of the small infirmary sink. Her eyes fell on the scissors still lying on the table, beside the shredded remains of his blood-stained shirt, the one she had cut open without hesitation to treat the wound. She remembered the heat of his skin under her fingers, the way his muscles clenched as the needle pierced him, and most of all, his eyes. They didn't reflect pain. They reflected something else. Presence. He had seen her, not as a nun, not as a nurse, not even as a woman tending a wound, but as a soul, fully, deeply. She dropped to her knees beside the examination table, hands clasped tightly, eyes moist. "My God," she whispered, trembling. "Why do I feel this?" But no answer came, only the hum of morning silence and the sound of her heart beating where his had just been. In the back seat of the black car, Marco kept his eyes fixed on the dusty road shrinking in the rearview mirror. But his mind was far away, caught in the memory of a pair of soft amber eyes, trembling hands that moved with trained precision, and a woman who smelled like lavender and incense. "She shouldn't have helped me," he muttered. Dante glanced at him through the mirror, but didn't speak. Marco rarely explained himself. This time was different. Something was off. He closed his eyes. She had fallen asleep sitting on a chair beside the cot where he'd spent the night. Her head tilted to the side, her features relaxed and pure. She was serenity, in a world that had none. Why would a woman like that hide herself away? He wondered. What pain is she punishing herself for? He knew how to read people. Survival demanded it. And she wasn't running, she was resisting. That only made him more intrigued. And more irritated. Because the idea that she would go on with her quiet, devout life as if he'd never entered it was unbearable. In the small chapel, Samara knelt in the front pew, eyes raised to the crucifix. She tried to focus on her prayer, but the words wouldn't stay. Everything felt tainted, not by sin, but by awakening. A memory surged, his voice, low and rough, whispering, "Thank you. I hope to see you again." It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have meant anything. But something inside her shifted, a part she had buried. What scared her wasn't what had happened. It was that part of her didn't want to forget. And that was the sin she feared most. Back at his safe house on the outskirts of Rome, Marco stood shirtless before the mirror. The fresh stitches were neat, clean, her work. He traced them gently with a fingertip, smiling faintly. "You've got a gift, sister," he muttered. Then the smile vanished. He dropped into a leather chair, lit a cigarette, and stared into the smoke as it curled upward. He thought of her calm voice, her nervous hands, the way her breath caught when she first saw his tattoos, the way she quickly looked away. But not in fear, in restraint. It had been a long time since someone looked at him without agenda or seduction, even longer since he'd cared what anyone saw. She didn't try to own him or fix him. She simply saw him. And that changed everything. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. That night, for the first time in years, Samara didn't pray before bed. She lay still on her small mattress, staring up at the ceiling beams. She didn't cry, didn't speak. Just felt. The weight of the silence, the echo of a presence already gone. And the terrifying truth, he wasn't just a memory, he was a mark, one she could no longer ignore. The city was buzzing. Flyers were being handed out in the streets. pinned to cafes, and passed from hand to hand in quiet anticipation. The ancient church of Saint Rosalia, nestled beside the convent on the hill, was preparing something rare, a public charity event, food, music, an art auction, and a community gathering to raise funds for a children's hospice. It was the first time in decades the nuns had opened their gates to the public, and Marco Aurelio knew before the flyers even hit the streets. His world was built on information whispers, secrets, movements. Nothing happened in the city without him hearing first, and this was a gift. The moment he saw her name, handwritten in the program list, Sister Samara, medical tent coordinator, something surged through his chest. She was going to be there. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the edge of the paper, eyes locked on her name like it was a coded message. "Get the car ready for Sunday," he said calmly. Dante raised a brow. "You're going?" Marco didn't answer. He didn't have to. Samara adjusted the neat row of bandages on the supply table, her movements efficient but distracted. Outside the tent, the choir was rehearsing. Laughter drifted through the courtyard. The townspeople were already gathering. Children ran between tables. Parishioners arranged trays of pastries and bottles of homemade wine. The sun was high. The air smelled of rosemary and fresh bread. It should have been peaceful. But Samara's heart felt like a trapped bird. He wouldn't come. Of course not. Why would a man like him care about a convent charity event? She shook the thought away and scolded herself in silence. It had been a single night, a wound, a thank you, nothing more. She was a servant of God. And yet, she wore her best habit, the one with the delicate stitching on the sleeves, the one that made her feel, without reason, noticed. He arrived late. Not out of disrespect, out of calculation. Let the crowds build, let the event breathe, let her relax. Then appear. The car stopped a block away from the church. Marco stepped out, dressed in dark slacks and a fitted shirt. No suit, no security, just him. Sharp, clean, dangerously composed. As he approached the church grounds, he saw the crowd part almost unconsciously. Heads turned. Mothers tightened their grip on children. Some men looked away. Others nodded in cautious recognition. Everyone knew who he was. But he wasn't here to make a statement. He was here for her. His eyes scanned the courtyard until he saw the medical tent. And then there she was, sitting on a wooden bench beside a little girl with a scraped knee. Her sleeves were rolled just enough to show the soft curve of her forearm. Her habit fluttered in the breeze, and when she smiled, something inside, Marco cracked. He stood still for a moment, watching her laugh, breathing her in from afar. Then, her gaze lifted. She saw him, and the world around her stopped. Her throat tightened. She blinked once, twice. But he didn't vanish. He stood like he didn't belong because he didn't. Not here, not among the flowers and prayer candles and choir songs. And yet, her soul reached for him. She rose to her feet, unsure what she would say, unsure if she could say anything at all. But he was already walking toward her. Slowly, intentionally, eyes locked on hers like there was no one else in the world. The sounds around her faded into the background. The murmurs, the laughter, the soft music from the choir, all of it blurred as Marco Aurelio approached. Sister Samara stood still, though her heart raced wildly. Their eyes locked in the middle of the crowd, and for a moment, the world seemed to slow down. He stopped in front of her. That same gaze, steady, intense, almost arrogant. But something had shifted, something she couldn't name. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly, making sure no one else could hear. "And how is your injury?" He offered a small, almost teasing smile. "I came to thank you again," he said, slipping his hand inside his jacket, "and to give you something you deserve." He pulled out a thick brown envelope. He placed it on the table beside them, saying nothing more. But its weight spoke volumes. Money. A lot of it. She looked at it, then at him. "I can't accept this," she said, stepping back like the envelope might burn her. "That's not why I helped you." "I know," he replied, with a rare sincerity in his voice. "But still, what you did was more than care. You saved me. That's worth something." She shook her head. "No, thank you, but no." Marco took a breath and calmly picked the envelope back up. But there was no disappointment in his eyes, only growing interest. "Can I ask you something?" she said, cautious, almost afraid of his answer. "You can ask me anything," he replied, voice low and steady. How did you get hurt that night? Who are you really?" A brief silence fell between them. The kind of silence that comes right before a proposal that shouldn't be made but once made changes everything. He leaned in just slightly. "I can answer every question you have, but not here," he murmured. "Tomorrow night, at my place." She froze. The invitation hung in the air, dangerous and seductive. He wanted her there, alone, in his world. I can't leave. I'm a nun." "Yes, you can," he said calmly, as if vows and rules meant nothing. "You just have to find a way." Samara lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Like she still had choices. Like the world outside her walls still belonged to her. Before she could answer, he stepped back. "Think about it, sister," he said, a sly smile tugging at his lips, before disappearing into the crowd. Later that night, just before the event ended, his name echoed through the church's sound system. Marco Aurelio had just made the largest donation of the evening. Quietly, no speech, no spotlight. Just a check laid humbly on the altar. And then he vanished. But he left behind a storm of questions and a heart beginning to tremble. Samara didn't sleep. She twisted in her narrow convent bed, as if the sheets were lined with thorns. The white ceiling above her offered no comfort, only a blank stare that mirrored her own unrest. She prayed, again and again. But every time she closed her eyes, his voice returned deep, low, and undeniably sure of itself. "Tomorrow night, at my place." The invitation echoed like a sin. But what truly unsettled her wasn't his voice. It was her desire to say yes. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to summon peace. But no verse, no prayer, could quiet the storm within. What was happening to her? That night she stitched his wound. She told herself it was just duty, just compassion. But she remembered everything the moment the blade of her scissors slipped through his shirt, exposing muscle, skin, ink. He hadn't flinched. She had. The tattoo, the heat of his skin, the way he looked at her even in pain, even bleeding as if she were something forbidden and beautiful. She rose from bed before the first bell rang. Her hands worked all morning, cleaning, folding, tending the garden, but her mind was elsewhere. Restless, torn, awake. The other sisters noticed her silence, but no one asked. She stood before the altar, whispering a prayer, but even her words felt dry, like leaves blown by a wind she could no longer control. Somewhere inside her, something had shifted. On the other side of the city, Marco Aurelio hadn't slept either. His room was dark and silent, except for the soft ticking of a luxury clock on the wall. He lay in bed, arms folded behind his head, staring into nothing but seeing only her. She had disarmed him, and he hated losing control. There was no reason for him to go to that charity event, none. But when he heard about it, he knew exactly where he had to be. And when he saw her again, standing in that modest dress, with her hair hidden beneath the veil, he knew he had been right. He'd tested her. He offered money she refused. He offered answers, she asked the right questions. And then he invited her into his world. Now, he wondered, would she come? Would she dare? Marco Aurelio didn't usually wait for things. But for her, he would. Back at the convent, Samara sat in the garden, her hands resting still on her lap. The sun had begun to set, and golden light bathed the rose bushes, casting long, soft shadows across the earth. She'd spent the entire day avoiding mirrors. But even without seeing her own reflection, she knew something had changed. Could a single invitation break down years of vows? She didn't know. What she did know was this. When he left that night, something stayed behind. Something dangerous and alive. As the sky deepened to orange and violet, she whispered one last prayer. But this time, it wasn't for strength. It was for clarity. Because the night was coming. And with it, a decision that could never be undone. The convent slept. Sister Samara sat at the edge of her narrow bed, heart pounding, hands trembling on her lap. The silence of the night wrapped around her like a secret, and tonight she would break it. She stood slowly, careful not to wake the others. The old wooden floors creaked beneath her bare feet, and every sound felt amplified by the weight of what she was about to do. Wrapped in her plain dress and a dark coat, she tiptoed past the chapel, past the garden gates, and paused for a breath beside the iron gate. She looked back once. And then, she stepped out. The night air was cool and still, the street empty under flickering lamplight. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement, quick and hesitant. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had made her choice. Then, out of the quiet darkness, a black car slowed beside her. The window rolled down with a soft hum. A man in a tailored suit leaned slightly forward. "Miss Samara?" His voice was calm, professional. "Mr. Marco Aurelio asked me to bring you safely." She froze. Her breath caught. She glanced back at the convent, then at the man, and nodded. She got in. The car moved smoothly through the sleeping city, and the silence inside felt charged, full of the questions she hadn't dared ask herself. After a few minutes, she found her voice. "How did he know I'd come?" The driver didn't turn. "He didn't. He just told me to wait." Samara swallowed hard, turning her gaze to the window, where the lights of the city slowly gave way to trees, winding roads, and open space. The further they went, the quieter it became. Soon, large iron gates opened ahead of them. Beyond them stood a stunning mansion, elegant and secluded, surrounded by towering trees and lit by warm golden lights. The car stopped at the front steps. The driver got out and opened her door. Samara hesitated for a moment, her pulse racing. She stepped out into the cool night air, staring up at the grand house and wondering how far from herself she had just walked. She was nervous, anxious, not because she feared him, but because deep down she feared herself. What she might feel, what she might want, what she might do. And yet, she had come. Marco Aurelio was already waiting at the entrance of the mansion, leaning against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, and a half smile on his face. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, collar slightly undone. A dangerous charm, subtle, effortless. Samara stopped when she saw him. For a second, she hesitated. "Good evening, Sister Samara," he said, his tone walking the fine line between teasing and reverent. "Or just Samara tonight." She looked away, shy, but she stepped inside. The air between them felt thick, charged with something neither of them dared to name. Not yet. "Would you like to see the house?" She simply nodded, and he gestured gently, like someone offering more than just rooms and corridors, as if inviting her into a whole different world. The mansion was elegant, filled with dark wood, antique chandeliers, and artwork that said much but revealed little. Marco walked slowly, guiding her through it. All the main hall, the library, the fireplace room, the winter garden. "This is where I finished recovering that night," he said as they passed one of the long corridors. She stopped. "How exactly did you get hurt?" He stopped too, resting his back lightly against the wall. "A deal gone wrong. Guns, a chase. One of my men got shot, and I almost took the last one. You talk about it like it's normal. For me it is." He wasn't lying, nor was he being dramatic. But there was something in his eyes, a past he wasn't afraid to speak of, yet never fully revealed. A mystery that deepened with every word. "And you?" he asked. "What made you trade the world for a convent?" She hesitated, but his honesty, as dangerous as it was, demanded truth in return. "I lost my parents and my sister in an accident. I was the only one who survived. I spent a long time trying to understand why." She inhaled slowly. "Being a nurse wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to serve, really help. I gave my life to charity, to faith." He looked at her for several seconds in silence, as if he saw something in her that he never had or had long ago lost. "I respect that," he said. She smiled faintly, unsure whether his words came from admiration or pain. The hours passed with unlikely conversations, quiet laughter, and glances that tried to avoid each other, but collided in every pause between words. He was teasing, but never crossed a line. He respected her boundaries, which only made her more confused. When the clock passed 3 a.m., Samara stood, visibly anxious. "I have to go, before the other sisters wake up." Marco simply nodded. "The car is ready to take you back." He walked her to the door. No kiss, no touch, but their eyes spoke more than any words exchanged that night. Outside, the driver waited. Samara got into the car, her heart a battlefield, unsure if what hurt more was the desire or the doubt. But the night wasn't over yet. Behind a tree, hidden in the shadows, a man stood watching, a camera in his hands. He captured everything. "Flash off." Eyes sharp. And the lens focused on her. The silence inside the abandoned warehouse was thick, almost suffocating. Only the sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the cold concrete floor. He walked slowly, as if carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders, or perhaps the weight of every crime he had ever committed. Miguel Silveira. A feared name. A face never seen in the newspapers, but whispered in both police stations and underworld gatherings with equal dread. The kind of man who could order a death as casually as he lit a cigar. He stopped near a boarded-up window, staring out at the dark city skyline. The same city he wanted to rule, alone. And Marco Aurelio was the last obstacle in his path. "Bastard! He should have died that night," he muttered, recalling the blood, the gunfire, the chaos. He had nearly succeeded, but nearly was never enough for Miguel. The metal door creaked open behind him. One of his men stepped in, clearly uneasy. "Sir, we have something that might interest you." Miguel turned slowly. The man extended a brown envelope. Without a word, Miguel took it, sat on a rusted chair, and pulled out the contents with the deliberate calm of a man used to secrets. Photographs. Samara. In one, she was getting into Marco's car. In another, standing beside him at the gates of the mansion, their bodies close. Another captured them at the church charity event, her smile soft, his eyes focused solely on her. There was no mistaking it. She mattered. "Who is this woman?" Miguel asked, his voice low and sharp. "She's a nun, boss. Apparently, she treated him when he was injured. They met again at a church event a few nights ago." "A nun?" Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, but we're not sure if that's all there is." Silence. Miguel ran his thumb along the edge of the photograph, then smiled. That kind of smile. Slow, dangerous, calculated. Interesting, he said, eyes fixed on Samara's face. Finally, Marco Aurelio, you've revealed your weakness. He rose from the chair, the photographs now scattered across the table like pieces of a game. The cool night breeze slipped through the cracks in the walls, rustling the papers like a whisper of what was coming. The game had changed, and Samara, without knowing, had just become part of it. The night had barely ended, and the sky was still painted in deep blue when Samara slipped quietly through the convent gates, her heart pounding wildly. The chill of the early morning air brushed against her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still there, in that softly lit room, wrapped in the tension of his voice, in the shadow of a man who made her feel everything she had been trained to silence. She undressed quickly, replaced her clothes with her habit, and padded silently down the hallway to her room. The other sisters were still asleep. No one noticed she had been gone. She sat on her bed, removed her shoes, and placed her hands on her lap, trembling. Why did I go there? She whispered to herself. But the answer was immediate, unrelenting, undeniable. Because he made her feel alive. Even now, within the sacred walls of silence and devotion, she felt bare, as though he had seen past the uniform, beyond the layers of duty, straight into the fragile, pulsing truth of who she was underneath. She curled up on the bed, eyes wide open. Sleep would not come. And all she could think was, will he come for me again? Marco Aurelio stood on the balcony of his mansion, untouched glass of wine in his hand. The sunrise spilled over the horizon, bathing the world in amber light, but his eyes were locked on the empty road beyond the gates, the same road she had been driven down just hours ago. She was silence and fire wrapped in the same skin, and in a world of noise, greed, and chaos, she had managed to pierce right through his walls with a single glance. He had known many women, too many to count. None of them lingered in his thoughts the way she did. Samara had refused his money, had listened without judgment, had seen him not the name, not the power, but the man. He tightened his grip on the glass. She's inside my head, that's not good. He remembered her hesitant footsteps as she walked through the mansion, her curious eyes, her quiet strength, and that moment when she said she had to leave and something in him wanted to stop her, keep her, lock the door and throw away the key. But he didn't. And now she haunted him. The day was long, too long. She moved through her chores in a daze, helped prepare meals, organized donations, prayed, but her thoughts always drifted back to him. His voice, his scars, his story. There was danger in him, that much was clear. But there was also truth, a kind of truth that didn't come dressed in white robes or spoken from the altar. A raw, broken truth that echoed with pain and survival. And despite every vow, every rule, every warning etched into her soul, she wanted to see him again. Marco sat in his study, files and weapons scattered on his desk, but nothing could distract him from the image of her standing in his living room. Untouchable, ethereal. He didn't know how or when it had happened, but she had carved herself into his thoughts soft and slow, and now he couldn't shake her free. He ran a hand through his hair and leaned back in the chair. She won't come to me again, he muttered to himself. But even as he said it, the wheels in his mind were already turning. She would, because he'd find a way. Marco stood by the tall window of his study, the phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, almost cautious, a tone few had ever heard him use. Samara, he said, pausing to breathe, would you like to see me again? There was a silence on the other end. Then her soft voice came, hesitant but honest. Yes. He closed his eyes briefly. Relief, satisfaction, anticipation. Tonight. Quiet place, discreet. I'll send the address. Samara. She changed out of her habit. Nothing flashy, just a modest dress and a cardigan. Her heart thumped so loudly, she was certain the others could hear it. The convent was still and peaceful as the sun began to set. She slipped out unnoticed. Each step she took down the stone path, onto the quiet streets, felt surreal. She was going to meet him again, and despite every internal warning, she wanted it. The address led her to a narrow street with few people, just as dusk began to melt into night. Her eyes scanned the buildings for the restaurant, then everything happened in a blur. A black car screeched to a stop. Two men jumped out. One grabbed her from behind, the other covered her mouth with a cloth. Her scream was muffled. She kicked, struggled, but it was no use. She was thrown into the back seat, the door slammed shut, and the car disappeared into the night. Marco. The restaurant was dimly lit, a small place known only to a few. Marco had chosen it for its discretion, its privacy, the perfect spot for something forbidden. He arrived 10 minutes early, as always, ordered wine, watched the door. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. She wasn't the type to be late. Something was wrong. He stood to leave instincts on fire when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "You've been stood up, Marco." The voice was smooth, mocking. Miguel. Marco's blood turned cold. "Where is she?" Miguel chuckled, slow and venomous. "She's lovely, you know. Not really your type, though. Too pure. Too delicate for blood-stained hands." Marco clenched his jaw. His voice was ice. "If you touch her—" "Relax," Miguel interrupted. "She's a guest. For now. But if you want to see her again, come talk. Just you and me. Old friends." The line went dead. Marco stood there in the middle of the restaurant, fists clenched, heart thundering. A storm was brewing inside him, and someone was about to pay for touching what was his. Samara was tied to a wooden chair in a dimly lit room, trembling with fear. The ropes bit into her wrists, and her breath came shallow and quick. Across from her stood Miguel, cold, ruthless, and relentless. He paced slowly, then stopped, fixing his piercing eyes on her. "Tell me about Marco Aurelio," Miguel demanded, voice low but sharp. "What do you know about him?" Samara swallowed hard. She shook her head, voice barely a whisper. "I don't know anything. I only helped a wounded man that night at the convent, that's all." Miguel's lips curled into a cruel smile. "So you don't know why he's so interested in you?" She looked up defiantly, despite her fear. "You picked the wrong woman. I don't know anything about him." Miguel's gaze darkened. "How did you two meet then? Tell me." Samara's voice was trembling as she recounted the story. "He came into the convent, badly hurt. I treated his wound. That's it. Nothing more." Miguel's patience wore thin. "You're hiding something." "No," she insisted. "I swear, I'm just a nun. I don't know his secrets." Frustrated, Miguel stood up abruptly. "You may have fooled me, for now." He turned on his heel and left the room without another word. At his mansion, Marco was gathered with his trusted men, tension thick in the air. His jaw was tight. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. The sharp ring of his phone broke the silence. He answered quickly. A location appeared on the screen. A public square. Miguel's message was clear. A meeting. Marco nodded grimly. "It's time." The square was alive with unsuspecting people. Families strolling, street vendors calling out, children playing near the fountain. But hidden among the crowd, men from both sides watched closely, disguised in plain clothes. Marco arrived, his eyes scanning the area for Miguel. Finally, Miguel appeared, flanked by his own guards, a smug expression on his face. "Let's talk terms," Miguel said smoothly. Marco's expression hardened. Miguel laid out his demands coldly and without hesitation. All of it. Your legal and illegal businesses, your properties, your arsenal, your art collections, and your men. A tense silence fell between them as the weight of the demands sank in. The quiet hum of the peaceful square belied the storm that was about to erupt. Marco ficou en silencio por algunos segundos. Seus ojos estaban distantes, fixos en un punto indefinido no nada. O peso da decisión que precisaba tomar parecía afundá-lo por dentro, o alrededor ficou denso. Miguel percebeu. E como un predador sentindo o cheiro do sangue, se aproximou com sorriso malicioso no rosto. Ela despegou de jeito, não é? Disse com voz baixa, carregada de deboche. Eu entendo. Ela é tudo que não pertence ao nosso mundo. Doce ingenua e linda, aquela pele, aquele cheiro, e convite ao pecado, envolto em pureza. Marco se virou lentamente, os olhos em chamas. Seu rosto endureció. Cala essa boca imunda. Rosno entre os dentes, dando paso à frente. Miguel ergueu uma sobrancelha, satisfeito por tê-lo provocado. Eu vou entregar, tudo continuou Marco. A voz grave firme, mas cheia de fúria contida. Tudo o que você quiser, meus negócios, meus bens, meus homens, você pode levar. Ele fez uma pausa, seu olhar cravado em Miguel como uma lâmina. Mas não ousa encostar dedo nela. O você vai implorar premor. Miguel não respondeu, mas o sorriso sumiu. A guerra silenciosa entre os dois homens crescia a cada segundo, e Samara era o centro do campo minado. Marco fell silent for a few seconds. His eyes were distant, fixed on some undefined point in the void. The weight of the decision he had to make seemed to sink into him like lead. The air around him grew heavy. Miguel noticed, and like a predator sensing the scent of blood, he stepped closer, a malicious smile spreading across his face. "She got to you, didn't she?" he said in a low voice, laced with mockery. "I get it. She's everything that doesn't belong in our world. Sweet, naive, and beautiful. That skin, that scent, a temptation wrapped in purity." Marco turned slowly, eyes blazing. His face hardened. "Shut that filthy mouth," he growled through clenched teeth, taking a step forward. Miguel raised an eyebrow, satisfied to have struck a nerve. "I'll give you everything," Marco continued, his voice deep, firm, but filled with restrained fury. "Everything you want, my business, my assets, my men, you can have it all." He paused, his gaze piercing Miguel like a blade. "But don't you dare lay a finger on her, or you'll beg to die." Miguel didn't respond, but the smile vanished. The silent war between the two men grew heavier with every second, and Samara was at the center of the minefield. Marco returned to the mansion like a storm, his expression hard, his eyes burning with rage, his whole body tense. The adrenaline of the imminent confrontation rushed through his veins like fire. His men were already gathered in the main hall, standing and waiting for his command. Dante, calm and efficient as always, didn't waste time. "What's the next move, boss?" Marco crossed his arms and took a deep breath, trying to control the fury boiling inside him. "Miguel and his men need to be eliminated tonight, before they can do anything else to Samara. Did you manage to track any of his men?" Dante gave a firm nod and handed over some images and location reports they'd gathered throughout the day. "We have eyes on their movements. We're ready to strike whenever you give the word." Marco's jaw clenched, and his voice came low and sharp. "Good. I want a fast, clean hit. No chances for retaliation. This ends tonight." Meanwhile, elsewhere, in a cold and dimly lit room, Samara sat tied to a wooden chair, fear coursing through her entire body. Miguel had returned. But this time he was different, less calm, more violent. The cruelty he usually masked behind a charming smile now gleamed openly in his eyes. He entered the room with slow, heavy steps and stopped just inches from her pale, frightened face. Soon you'll be in my arms, he said with a wicked grin. But first, you're going to tell me everything about your beloved Marco Aurelio. Samara shook her head, her voice trembling. I don't know anything. I just helped a wounded man. Please, I swear, I don't know anything about him. Miguel's expression darkened, his hands curling into fists. Liar! The slap came without warning, sharp and loud. Her head snapped to the side, and a sob escaped her lips. Before she could recover, his hand grabbed her chin, squeezing cruelly. You think I'm stupid? He growled. You think I don't know how he looks at you? Then, slowly, he pulled out a small blade from his pocket. A razor-sharp knife that gleamed under the single hanging bulb in the room. Let's make this interesting. He moved behind her and tightened the ropes even more, making sure she couldn't move. Samara whimpered, her breathing growing quicker, panic completely taking over. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. She felt like screaming, but fear kept her voice stuck in her throat. The blade danced near her neck, not cutting, just threatening. His cruelty was cold and deliberate. Tell me what he's planning. Tell me what you know. You don't want me to lose my patience. I swear. I don't know anything, she whispered, tears falling down her cheeks. Miguel hit her again, grabbed her arm, and squeezed until bruises began to form. You think he'll save you? You think he's coming for you? He hissed, venom dripping from each word. When I'm done with him, you'll beg to forget he ever existed. Despite the terror, Samara held on. She wouldn't break. She couldn't. Far away in his mansion, Marco stood surrounded by his men. He was no longer just furious. He was ready for war. Every second mattered. His mind was locked on one thing, saving her. Then his phone vibrated. A message. A location. A public square. Marco's eyes narrowed. He knew what it meant. He was going to meet Miguel, and end this, no matter what it cost. The night was heavy, cloaked in silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Marco's men moved with precision, silent shadows blending into the darkness. The plan was simple. Get in, take them down, and bring Samara home. Fast, lethal, no mercy. Each step taken was calculated, each movement cold and deliberate. When they reached the hideout, the signal was given. In a matter of minutes, the ambush began. Gunfire echoed, but only from one side. Marco's men struck first, and they struck hard. One by one, Miguel's guards fell. No hesitation, no survivors. Inside the building, Samara sat tied to a chair, her face bruised, her lip bleeding, her eyes swollen from fear and sleeplessness. The noise of gunfire startled her, heart racing, panic flaring. She didn't know if rescue was coming or death. Suddenly, the door burst open. Armed men stormed in. And then she saw him. Marco. He looked like a storm, clad in black, blood splattered on his shirt, jaw clenched, eyes darker than she'd ever seen. There was no trace of the composed man she had once sat with in that elegant mansion. He was wrath incarnate. His eyes found her instantly, and everything else disappeared. Meanwhile, Miguel had been caught trying to escape. Two of Marco's men dragged him back in, striking him hard in the head. He fell to his knees, blood trailing down his face, gasping, stunned. Samara trembled as two of Marco's men worked quickly to untie her. Her wrists were sore, her arms numb, but she couldn't look away from Marco. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just stared, paralyzed. She had never seen that side of him, the killer, the predator. He stepped closer to Miguel, who was now kneeling, bloody and breathing heavily. There was no fear in Marco's face, only disgust, cold and sharp. The room was deadly quiet as Marco reached him. Miguel raised his head and smirked faintly despite the pain. So, he started. He never finished. Marco raised his gun and fired twice into Miguel's chest. No hesitation, no warning. Miguel collapsed, lifeless, before he even touched the floor. The sound of the shots ripped through the air, and Samara jumped, her whole body recoiling. Her breathing hitched, her eyes wide, her body frozen. Marco turned to her, walking slowly, then kneeling in front of her. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now. I'm sorry." She looked into his eyes. And he saw it, the shock. Not fear of death, but fear of who he truly was. That moment pierced him deeper than any bullet ever could. Then her eyes rolled back. She collapsed forward. Marco caught her in his arms. "Samara," he whispered, holding her tightly. "I've got you." He lifted her gently, like she was the most fragile thing in the world. She was light in his arms, far too still. His men cleared the way. No one spoke. The war was over. But Marco Aurelio didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. As he stepped out into night carrying her, he realized one truth. He could win 1,000 wars, but losing her, changing her, was a price he might never forgive himself for. The mansion was quiet, wrapped in soft shadows. The only sound was the faint clinking of ice in the glass Marco held, standing motionless in front of his office window. His eyes were lost in the darkness outside, where the trees swayed slowly, as if the world were trying to return to normal. But inside him, nothing felt normal. Samara was resting in the guest suite, the most comfortable room in the house, under medical care and constant surveillance. Marco had hired a private nurse, but he was the one who spent most of the time at her side. When she opened her eyes for the first time, he was there. Sitting beside the bed, his head lowered, hands clasped. She blinked slowly, confused. "Where am I?" He lifted his gaze. His brown eyes, usually intense and cold, were now filled with relief and pain. "You're safe, Samara," he said softly. "You're in my home. You're safe now." She looked at him for several seconds, as if trying to remember who he was. And then, like a wave crashing down, the memories returned. The captivity, the fear, Miguel, the blood, the gunshots. "You killed him," she whispered. Marco nodded slowly. "I did." Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. She turned her face away, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "He hit me." Marco closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the urge to destroy everything around him. I know his voice was low and hoarse. "If I could, I would take all your pain and carry it myself. Forgive me for not getting there sooner." She didn't respond, just lay there, staring at the ceiling. In the days that followed, Marco cared for her with a dedication no one would expect from a man like him. He was the one who cleaned her wounds, prepared her favorite meals, and even read to her in a low voice when words became too heavy. And slowly, she began to open up again. "You're dangerous," she said one night as he adjusted her pillows so she could sit more comfortably. "I am," he answered without hesitation, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I never hid who I am. But with you, I want to be different." She looked at him, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I was scared of you, that night, when you shot him, without blinking." Marco lowered his head. "You saw the real me that night, and still, I'm here because I can't stay away." She watched him in silence for several long seconds, then slowly reached out and touched his hand. "And I'm scared, because I can't stay away either." The touch was gentle, but it spoke louder than any words. Their bond grew stronger in the silence. The conversations became deeper. He told her about his past, a harsh childhood, the moment he chose the path that made him feared. She told him about her parents, her sister, and why she had chosen a life of charity. And in the extreme contrast between them, something real took root. Marco didn't touch her with desire. He touched her with care, with reverence, as if every part of her was something too precious to be hurt again. She, in turn, felt a storm inside. The pain of what she had lived was still there, but so was his presence, strong, intense, protective, and dangerously magnetic. That night, as he was leaving her room, after making sure she was comfortable, she called out, "Marco?" He stopped at the door, turning slowly. "I don't know what's going to happen between us, but thank you for not leaving me alone." He looked at her, and something inside him shattered and healed all at once. "I never will." And she believed him. Even without knowing where their path would lead, in that moment, one thing was certain. They were drawing closer, and the abyss between who they were and who they longed to be suddenly felt less terrifying, as long as they were together. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The gardens of the mansion stretched wide, manicured and peaceful, filled with the soft scent of blooming flowers and the sound of distant birds. Samara walked slowly along the stone path, her hand brushing over the tops of lavender bushes, while Marco walked beside her. It was the first time she'd left her room since the night of the rescue. Her wounds were healing, but her soul still carried bruises. "It's beautiful here," she murmured, her voice soft. Marco glanced at her. "I hoped you'd like it." They walked in silence for a few moments. The tension between them was different now, no longer born of fear, but of things left unsaid, of truths still forming. "Can I ask you something?" she said, stopping by a small stone bench under an olive tree. He nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She did, and he sat beside her, his body turned toward hers. "Why did Miguel kidnap me?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I mean, we barely knew each other. I didn't know anything about your world, about you. Why me?" Marco sighed, rubbing his hands together slowly. "Because Miguel saw something. Something I didn't even realize right away." "What do you mean?" He looked at her now, directly, intensely. "He saw the way I looked at you, the way I smiled when you were near. He saw it before I even understood it myself, that you were, different, that you mattered." Samara's breath caught slightly, and she looked away, cheeks flushed. "And do I?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Do I really matter?" Marco didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, his eyes never leaving hers. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips, one she had never seen before. "Yes," he said, low and certain. "You do." Samara's heart beat wildly. She looked into his eyes, feeling the weight of his gaze, the truth in it, and something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to tenderness. He leaned closer, their faces now just inches apart. "Marco," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the wind. And then it happened. His lips met hers in a kiss that was at once gentle and intense, a promise and a confession. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was deliberate, real. Her eyes closed, her hand instinctively resting against his chest. The world seemed to fade, leaving only that moment. The warmth of his mouth, the way his fingers lightly touched her face, the unspoken emotion passing between them. When they slowly parted, Samara was breathless. Marco rested his forehead against hers, his voice a murmur. "I've done terrible things in my life, but this, you, feel like the only thing that makes sense." She didn't answer, but the way she looked at him was enough. In the middle of a world built on shadows, something bright had begun. And neither of them could deny it anymore. 3 days had passed since the rescue. Samara, although physically better, was still emotionally shaken. The bruises on her face were beginning to fade, but the confusion in her heart lingered. Marco had been constant, caring, patient, always near, always attentive. His presence calmed her, even when her thoughts refused to. That afternoon they were in the glass room of the mansion. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden shadows on the floor. Samara sat on a velvet chair, her hands resting gently on her lap, eyes lost in the garden outside. I think I need to go back to the convent, she said softly, not looking at him. Marco stood by the window, his back half turned to her. At her words, he slowly turned around. His jaw tensed, and his eyes, so often unreadable, now held something she couldn't name. He approached her with slow, measured steps until he stood directly in front of her. She felt her breath catch at his nearness. Do you really need to go back? And do you want to go back, Samara? He asked, voice low, firm. She looked up at him, startled by the question. Her lips parted, but no answer came immediately. That's my life. It's where I swore to serve, she finally said, though even she could hear the hesitation in her own voice. Marco knelt down before her, his eyes locked on hers. The closeness was overwhelming. I saw your pain, I saw your fear, and I also saw your strength, even when you were barely holding on. You don't have to go back out of duty, Samara. The real question is, do you want to? She looked away, her pulse quickening. She didn't know anymore. Everything had changed. I don't know, she whispered, cheeks flushed with the weight of the truth. He leaned in slightly, still not touching her, but close enough for her to feel him. His warmth, his breath, his intensity. You already know what I want. I want you here. I want you to stay, but I won't pressure you. I just need you to know. If you stay, I'll take care of you, every day, with everything I am. Her heart pounded so loudly, she was sure he could hear it. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She was trembling, visibly. Marco noticed. His fingers brushed lightly against her arm, gentle, almost reverent. She closed her eyes at contact, swallowing hard. Don't think with fear, think with your heart, he whispered, his voice like silk, full of emotion. Then, slowly, he stood and walked away, leaving her alone in the golden light of the room. Samara sat there for what felt like hours, watching the wind move through the garden trees, listening only to her heartbeat and the storm within it. A decision was coming, one that would change everything. Dawn broke gently over the convent, casting soft golden light through the stained glass windows. Samara had spent the entire night in silent prayer within the chapel. For years, this sacred place had been her sanctuary, her shelter, her commitment, her certainty. But now, something had changed. Something inside her pulsed with quiet urgency, a feeling too powerful to ignore. With her heart pounding, she made her way to the office of the Mother Superior. She knocked softly. Come in, my child, came the familiar calm voice of Mother Clara, a wise, graceful woman whose presence always carried peace. Samara entered, standing hesitantly until Mother Clara motioned for her to sit. I see turmoil in your eyes, she said gently. What troubles you, Samara? Samara took a deep breath. Her voice trembled. Mother, I need to open my heart to you. And she did. She spoke of the night she found Marco bleeding on the road, of how she cared for him, of the danger, the kidnapping, the rescue, and finally, of how she felt. It's not just compassion anymore. I think of him constantly. He's in my prayers, my thoughts. He's part of my breath now. And I don't know what to do with this. Have I failed my calling? Mother Clara remained silent, listening with the patience and love of someone who had guided many souls. When Samara finished, tears threatening to spill from her eyes, the Mother Superior reached out and held her hands. My dear child, she said warmly, serving God comes in many forms, and love, true, selfless love, is not a betrayal of your faith, it is a gift from Him. Samara's lips parted, her breath catching. Do you think it's love? I believe so. Love, when it is honest and kind, is sacred. You're not turning your back on God. You're discovering a new way to live with Him in your heart. A tear slipped down Samara's cheek. She nodded, quietly absorbing the words. Then, I want to leave the convent. I want to follow what my heart is telling me. Then go with peace and my blessing. Later that day, with a small suitcase in her hand and her veil gently folded inside, Samara embraced the sisters she had lived beside for years. There were tears, laughter, and heartfelt goodbyes. She walked to the convent gates with gratitude, her chest tight with emotion. Outside, Marco's driver was already waiting. He gave her a warm nod and opened the car door. The drive back to the mansion was quiet. Samara stared out the window, her thoughts racing between the past she was leaving and the unknown ahead. As the car rolled past the gate of the mansion, it felt different, less like a stranger's place, more like somewhere she belonged. And there he was. Marco stood at the entrance, wearing dark pants and a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. His gaze was fixed on her, steady and intense. She stepped out slowly, her suitcase still in hand. The air felt electric between them. She walked up to him, stopping a few feet away. Their eyes locked. Then she spoke, her voice quiet and uncertain. "So, what now, Marco?" He smiled faintly, eyes softening as he stepped forward. He took her suitcase with one hand and gently brushed her cheek with the other. "Now, we start again, together." That one sentence kept echoing in Samara's mind. Now, we begin again, together. She looked into Marco's eyes, searching for any trace of doubt, any hesitation. But there was none. He stood before her, steady, committed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something solid beneath her feet. Marco took her inside the mansion, carrying her small suitcase in silence. The atmosphere between them had changed, no longer tense or uncertain, but soft and delicate, almost shy, as if both of them knew they were about to cross into unfamiliar territory. "Would you like to rest? Take a shower? Eat something?" he asked gently, a rare tenderness in his tone. Samara gave him a small smile, her eyes glowing. "A shower sounds perfect." He gestured toward the hallway. A room had already been prepared for her, not just a guest room like before, but one clearly arranged with care. Light curtains, fresh flowers on the dresser, a large bed with flawless white sheets. It felt like home. While she was in the shower, Marco waited in the living room, tense. He thought about everything they'd been through in such a short time. The fear, the danger, the violence, and now, this fragile but undeniable connection. He didn't say the word aloud, but he felt it deep in his chest. Love. It wasn't just desire. Samara had reached something within him no one else ever had. Moments later, Samara came downstairs. Her hair was damp, and she wore simple clothes. But to Marco, she looked more radiant than ever. He stood as soon as he saw her. "You look peaceful," he said softly. "I am. For the first time in a long time," she replied. They had dinner together on the terrace under the stars. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they'd always known one another. Samara spoke about her childhood, her decision to join the convent, her doubts. Marco, in turn, revealed parts of himself he rarely showed anyone, his absent father, his path into crime, the decisions that shaped him into the man he had become. "Aren't you afraid of me, Samara?" he asked seriously. She looked at him with calm sincerity. "Not of the man sitting in front of me." He swallowed hard. No one had ever looked at him that way, as though they saw past the armor and into the last fragile part of him. After dinner, they walked through the garden side by side. The silence between them was comfortable. Samara felt certain that she had returned to the right place. Marco, on the other hand, knew he couldn't let her go again. She was his light in the shadows. Before they parted for the night, he gently took her hand and looked into her eyes. "Are you sure you want to stay, Samara? My world, it's still dangerous." She smiled, sweet and unwavering. "I'm sure of what I feel, and this is where I want to be." He pulled her into a tight embrace, protective and full of silent promises. And in that quiet moment, without needing another word, they both knew. This was only the beginning. 2 months had passed since Samara walked once again through the gates of Marco's mansion. Much had changed, and at the same time, nothing had. They still slept in separate bedrooms, not because of a lack of desire, but out of respect, or perhaps fear of crossing a line neither of them could return from. Marco had become a constant presence in her days, strong, commanding, yet patient. Whenever his men arrived to discuss business, Samara would observe him from a distance. He was firm in his decisions, commanded with authority, and the others followed him with loyalty and fear. She couldn't deny how deeply that image stirred something inside her. It was the contrast, the brutal man with gentle eyes, the dangerous protector. And Marco was slowly losing control. He had never felt a desire like this. He wanted to touch her, to possess her, but more than anything, he wanted to be worthy of her. Nights had grown long. Sometimes they'd cross paths in the dim hallways of the mansion, accidental, silent encounters. Their eyes would meet, heavy with tension, longing unspoken. One night, Samara sat alone in the garden. She wore a soft white nightgown, barefoot on the cool stone path. Marco approached quietly, drawn to her presence like a magnet. "Can't sleep?" he asked in a low voice. "Too many thoughts," she replied without turning. He sat beside her, careful not to get too close, though his eyes didn't leave her. "What kind of thoughts?" She hesitated, then looked at him, directly, boldly. "About us." Marco's breath caught. "Samara." "Don't speak yet," she interrupted gently. "I know you want me. I feel it. And I want you too, Marco. But there's something you need to know first." He braced himself, his heart beating fast. "What is it?" She looked at him, vulnerable but strong. "I'm a virgin." Silence fell between them. Marco stared at her, surprised. Then something shifted in his eyes, a deep tenderness that almost broke her. "Never, never," she said quietly. "I was going to give myself completely to God. That was the plan. But then, everything changed. You changed everything." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to contain the storm of emotion in his chest. "Samara, you have no idea what that means to me. I don't just want to have you. I want to deserve you, protect you, honor you." She blinked, overwhelmed. He stood slowly, then knelt before her, gently taking her hand. "Marry me, Samara." Her eyes widened, stunned. "Are you serious?" "More serious than I've ever been." Tears welled up in her eyes, her heart pounding as she nodded with a shaky smile. "Yes, Marco, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. From that moment, everything changed. It wasn't just desire, it wasn't just tension. It was a bond, a promise. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was a kiss full of certainty. The kind of certainty that only love can bring. The days that followed the proposal moved with a new rhythm. Marco's mansion, once marked by silence and shadows, had become a hive of activity. Footsteps echoed through the halls. Deliveries arrived constantly. Flowers, fabric samples, wedding planners, all building towards something that felt surreal to Samara. She wandered through the preparations in a dreamlike state. There was joy, yes, but also nervousness. For the first time in her life, everything was in her hands. Choices, decisions, the future. And what a future it promised to be. With Marco. Marco himself had changed. He was still commanding, still sharp, but there was a fire in his eyes, a constant undercurrent of excitement that made him more daring. He was involved in every detail of the wedding, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. But what truly thrilled him wasn't the ceremony. It was her. Being close to Samara was a constant test of his control. He desired her fiercely, but had promised to wait. And he would. Still, it wasn't easy. One afternoon, Samara was trying on a dress a designer had brought to the mansion. The room was bathed in golden light, and she stood in front of a tall mirror, the back of the gown unbuttoned. Marco appeared at the doorway, unannounced. She saw him through the reflection and froze, eyes wide. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her cheeks flushing. "I know," he replied, closing the door behind him. "But I couldn't help myself." He walked slowly toward her, his eyes never leaving her. She could feel the intensity in his gaze, like heat against her skin. "You look beautiful." "It's not fitted yet," she whispered, trying to downplay the moment. "You're perfect," he said, his voice low. He moved closer, tracing a single finger down the exposed line of her back. She shivered. "You have no idea how much I crave you." She turned to face him, placing a hand on his chest. His heartbeat was fast beneath her palm. "Marco?" "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I promised to wait, and I will, but don't ask me to pretend I don't want you. Every second." A shy smile curved on her lips. "I think about you too, all the time." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, holding her gently. "Just a few more days," he whispered. "Then you'll be mine, in every way." A thrill ran through her as those words echoed in her mind. That night, alone in her room, Samara stared at the wedding dress hanging elegantly near the window. A knot of fear and excitement twisted in her chest. She was stepping out of the only world she had ever known, and into a future full of unknowns. But one thing was certain. She had already made her choice. And Marco was waiting for her. The day began with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The sun rose slowly over Marco's estate, casting golden light over the manicured gardens and marble terraces. The entire mansion was alive with quiet, meticulous activity. Staff moved with efficiency, ensuring that every flower, every crystal glass, every ribbon was perfectly in place. This was not just a wedding, it was a declaration of power, devotion, and transformation. Guests began to arrive long before the ceremony was set to begin. Men and women from the highest circles of power walked through the grand entrance, their tailored suits and glittering dresses matched only by the calculating sharpness in their eyes. Allies from the Italian Mafia, influential partners from across Europe and beyond, everyone was here. Most smiled politely, exchanged pleasantries, but all of them knew one thing: this wedding meant something. Marco stood at the altar beneath a canopy of white roses and trailing vines. Dressed in a custom black suit with midnight blue accents, he looked like the king of a hidden empire, standing tall and composed, but only outwardly. Inside, his chest was tight, his thoughts a whirlwind, but all of it fell quiet when he saw her. Samara! She stepped into the aisle bathed in sunlight, as if the universe itself had paused to admire her. Her dress was made of delicate lace, elegant and timeless. A soft veil covered part of her face, adding to her ethereal beauty. She walked slowly, her steps steady despite the emotional storm inside her. The crowd went silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. She was breathtaking. But more than her beauty, there was something deeper, an aura of purity, of peace, of softness the crowd wasn't used to. Surrounded by wolves, Samara was a lamb who somehow radiated power without needing to assert it. They saw it. They respected it. Marco felt his throat tighten. She was his. Finally. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Marco leaned forward and kissed her gently, reverently, like someone who had waited a lifetime for this one moment. Applause followed, though subdued and elegant. There was no excess, only admiration. The reception was held in a glass-ceilinged hall lit by chandeliers and hundreds of floating candles. Soft classical music filled the air. Waiters moved with precision, serving the finest wines and dishes to guests who smiled and congratulated the couple. Lavish gifts were placed in a separate room, priceless artworks, antique jewelry, and envelopes filled with unthinkable amounts of money. But Marco barely noticed any of it. His eyes remained fixed on Samara, watching her speak softly to guests, her cheeks pink with shyness, her smile reserved but warm. She belonged to this world now, yet stood apart from it, uncomplicated, serene. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. Dante, his loyal right-hand man, approached him with a glass of whiskey in hand and a knowing smile. "Boss, never thought I'd see the day," Dante said, his voice respectful but teasing. Marco smirked slightly, still watching Samara. "Neither did I." Dante chuckled. "She's different, the kind of woman that changes everything." Marco turned his head slowly, his gaze now firm. "She is everything." Dante didn't reply. He only nodded, understanding that the man he served had found the one thing none of them expected: peace, in the form of a woman. Later that night, the couple slipped away from the celebration. A sleek limousine waited at the entrance. Samara held her bouquet, and her eyes were bright yet heavy with emotion. Marco opened the door for her, helping her in with the same care one would offer to something sacred. Their destination, Venice. A wedding gift from one of the oldest and most feared dons in the Mafia. A private villa in the heart of the canals, exclusive and romantic. It was a gesture of respect, of alliance. Marco understood exactly what it meant. Dante and a few trusted men were already en route in separate vehicles, unseen but ever present. Their job was to ensure the couple's safety during the honeymoon, silently and efficiently. Inside the private jet, Marco removed his tie and leaned back, taking Samara's hand gently. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "It just feels unreal, like a dream I'm scared to wake up from." He brought her hand to his lips, brushing a kiss against her skin. "It's not a dream. This is our new reality." She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, the world outside that jet ceased to exist. There was no past, no future, just them. The Mafia king and the woman who had stolen his heart without even trying. Venice awaited. And so did the beginning of their forever. The night in Venice was like a painting in shades of gold and velvet. The private boat glided smoothly through the silent canals, illuminated by the soft light of ancient street lamps and the moon's reflection on the still water. Samara, wrapped in a light coat over her white dress, watched the city with wide, enchanted eyes. Marco stood beside her, quietly admiring every expression, every breath she took. The boat stopped in front of a villa by the canal. From the outside, it was discreet yet imposing. The wrought iron gates opened with a subtle click. As they entered, Samara held her breath. The villa was enchanting, with stone walls covered in ivy, tall windows draped with sheer curtains, and a courtyard garden lit by candles and small hidden lights among the foliage. "It's just ours, for as long as we want," Marco said softly, almost like a promise. He offered his arm, and she accepted, her trembling fingers brushing his. Inside, they were met only by a welcoming silence and the scent of jasmine. No servants, no noise. Everything was prepared for them. For this night. Marco led her upstairs slowly, calm but with a barely contained storm beneath. At the door to the bedroom, Samara paused. The room was a sanctuary of warmth, rich tones, rose petals scattered about, candles casting soft shadows over the antique furniture, and a huge bed at the center with crisp white linens. Her heart raced, her hands grew cold, her body felt both light and heavy. Marco stood before her, and for a moment no words were spoken. He simply looked at her, as if memorizing every detail. "Are you still afraid of me?" he whispered, almost hesitating. Samara lifted her eyes. There was no fear there. Nervousness, yes. Surrender, definitely. But mostly, trust. No, I trust you. He stepped closer. One hand traced her cheek gently, then rested on her chin. Finally, he kissed her. Unlike before, this kiss was slow and deep, unhurried, as if every second was precious. Samara responded, feeling her body ignite, her senses sharpen. The kiss deepened, his hands moving to her back, pulling her softly against his chest. He undid the tie of her coat and let it slip off her shoulders. His fingers found the zipper of her dress, but paused. If you're not ready. I am, she whispered, her voice shaky but firm. He searched her eyes for any doubt, but found only restrained desire. Slowly, he slid the zipper down, and the dress fell to the floor like a petal drifting down. Standing there in just her lingerie, Samara felt a flush rise through her body, but did not look away. Marco regarded her as if she were sacred. He kissed her shoulders, her collarbone, the curve of her neck. His touches were reverent, patient, warm, as if she were made of porcelain and fire at the same time. Gently, he laid her down on the sheets, undressing himself without hurry, revealing not only his body, but the vulnerability of a man who wanted more than just pleasure. He wanted to belong. Every gesture was full of meaning. Marco explored every inch of her skin, as if deciphering a mystery. Samara felt alive in a way she never had before, filled with new sensations. When he finally entered her, it was with care yet passion. Time seemed to stop. They moved in perfect harmony, guided by something stronger than desire, complete surrender, the union of two very different worlds. Samara whispered his name again and again, eyes shimmering with emotion. Marco murmured Italian words against her skin, like promises sealed deep in the soul. And when they reached the peak, it was like falling together into the abyss of passion and finding themselves whole, true, reborn in each other's arms. Afterward, he held her close, bodies still entwined, and kissed her forehead tenderly. You are mine now, my wife, my woman, my world. She closed her eyes and smiled, tears quietly tracing down her cheeks. And you are mine. In that hidden villa in Venice, beneath the silent midnight sky and the witness of the moon, something greater than any alliance was born. A real love. 1 year had passed since that unforgettable night in the Venetian villa, a year that had transformed both Marco and Samara in ways neither could have imagined. Marco had risen even higher in the shadowed world of the Mafia, now one of the most feared and respected dons. His name alone commanded obedience and reverence. Yet, despite the power and danger that surrounded him, something within him had softened, or rather, had found its true anchor. Samara. She had blossomed too, shedding the shy, reserved woman she once was. Though she still moved discreetly, attending charity events and helping those in need away from the spotlight, her confidence had grown. She had become a woman who knew her own strength and the rare privilege of being loved by a man like Marco. Their desire for each other was no longer just raw passion. It was a deep, simmering fire that burned brighter with every stolen glance, every lingering touch, every whispered word in the dark. On this cool evening, the mansion was quiet, except for the soft music playing in the background. Marco stood by the tall window, looking out over the city lights, while Samara approached from behind, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. He turned, and their eyes met, full of the unspoken history they shared. Without a word, she reached up and traced his strong jawline, her fingers trembling slightly. You've changed, she said softly. But some things, they never change. He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that made her heart race. Like this, he murmured, closing the distance between them, his hands resting gently on her hips. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and new dreams born. It was a kiss full of hunger and tenderness, a perfect balance of strength and vulnerability. They moved together seamlessly, bodies entwined, souls connected in a dance as old as time. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the power, not the enemies, not the world outside. Only them. Two souls, fierce and unbreakable, bound by love and desire. As the night deepened, so did their connection, every touch, every sigh, every heartbeat a testament to their journey. A journey that had begun with uncertainty and fear, but had grown into something powerful and eternal. And so, in the quiet luxury of their home, beneath the stars, Marco and Samara sealed their love once more, not with words, but with the language of passion and devotion. A love story that was theirs alone. Months continued to pass, and with them, Marco and Samara grew stronger, not just as a couple, but as partners in a life full of complexities and challenges. Marco, now established as one of the most respected dons in the Mafia, found in Samara his peace and balance. She, with her gentle light and determination, navigated that dark world by his side, always with the strength and grace that had won his heart. They learned that true love is not just passion or desire, it is support, trust, daily choices, and the courage to face whatever comes. And even amid the shadows surrounding Marco, Samara remained steadfast, a beacon of hope and tenderness in his turbulent life. As night fell over the silent mansion, a smile formed on Marco's lips as he looked at Samara, his wife, his muse, his everything. They had each other, and that was enough. The future, uncertain as always, could wait. Because in that moment, they had conquered the present, and it was perfect.
Before you go, let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Like this video to support the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.